The air in courtroom 4C crackled with an unspoken tension, thick and suffocating, as Judge Terran Harrison, a figure of imposing stature and fearsome reputation, loomed over Dr. Amara Collins. His gavel, usually a symbol of order, crashed down with savage force, inches from her outstretched hand, its reverberations silencing the courtroom into a stunned tableau. Two bailiffs, their faces grim, moved to seize Dr. Collins's arms, but she held herself with an unyielding grace, struggling only to maintain the facade of professional composure. Then Harrison stepped forward. His polished shoe, deliberately, contemptuously, crushing her meticulously prepared case notes on the cold marble floor. His breath, hot and stale, brushed against her ear as he leaned in close, a predator savoring the kill. "Next time," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that belied his public image. "Send someone worthy of my courtroom." Dr. Collins, however, was no ordinary expert witness. She straightened her spine, a silent challenge to his authority, and met his gaze with an unwavering intensity that seemed to pierce through his practiced disdain. Her lips parted, and she whispered 3 words, words imbued with a quiet power that resonated far beyond their simple utterance. The judge, a man who had commanded fear and respect for decades, reeled backward, his face draining of color, transformed in an instant from a menacing titan to a ghost-haunted shell. His hand trembled visibly against the polished bench, a stark testament to the seismic shift her words had wrought in his world. What 3 words, one might wonder, could unravel the composure of such a powerful man, leaving him looking as though he had stared into the abyss? The morning had begun with the promise of a different kind of justice. Dr. Amara Collins, a name synonymous with excellence in the rarefied world of neurology, had arrived at the Baltimore County Courthouse a full 40 minutes early. The early sunlight, slicing through the grand windows, caught the subtle gleam of her Harvard Medical School pin, a discreet yet potent symbol of 2 decades dedicated to the intricacies of the human brain and nervous system. She adjusted the lapel of her perfectly tailored blazer, a gesture of quiet self-assurance, and meticulously reviewed her expert testimony notes one final time, her mind already navigating the complex pathways of the upcoming case. Sandra Weiss, the plaintiff's attorney, a woman whose weary eyes held a glimmer of hope, greeted her with a handshake laced with palpable gratitude. "Dr. Collins, thank you for coming," Weiss said, her voice soft but earnest. "Your expertise will be crucial in proving the hospital's negligence." Dr. Collins offered a small, reassuring smile. "The MRI results speak for themselves," she replied, her voice calm and authoritative. "The patient deserved better care." Together, they entered courtroom 4C, a space steeped in the gravity of judgment, where the plaintiff sat nervously at the front table, a testament to the lives hanging in the balance. Dr. Collins offered a quick, empathetic nod before taking her designated seat, a silent promise of advocacy. Soon after, the defense team arrived, a phalanx of expensive suits and confident smirks, their presence radiating an air of untouchable privilege. Their expert witness, a silver-haired man with an almost theatrical gravitas, received immediate deference from the courtroom staff, a subtle but unmistakable signal of his perceived status. Precisely at 9 a.m., the bailiff's voice, sharp and resonant, sliced through the murmurs of anticipation. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Terran Harrison." The judge strode in, his black robe billowing behind him like a shadow, a formidable silhouette against the light. At 63, his reputation was a tapestry, woven with threads of fairness and uncompromising rigor, respect and fear. He surveyed the courtroom with practiced authority, his gaze sweeping over faces and figures until it landed, with an almost imperceptible pause, on Dr. Collins. Something shifted in his expression, subtle but undeniably present, a flicker of something unsettling that would soon unfold. During the introductory formalities, he scrutinized her credentials with visible skepticism. Harvard Medical School, board certification in neurology, extensive research publications. He looked up from her impressive resume, his eyes narrowing. "But how much actual clinical experience do you have, doctor?" he probed, the question dripping with thinly veiled challenge. 20 years of clinical practice, Your Honor, Doctor," Collins responded, her voice steady and clear, "with over 3,000 cases, similar to the one before the court today." He grunted, clearly unimpressed, dismissing her profound experience with a wave of his hand. Yet, when the defense introduced their expert, Dr. James Phillips, the judge's demeanor underwent a remarkable transformation. A warm smile softened his features as he mentioned his familiarity with Phillips's outstanding reputation, a stark contrast to the barely concealed contempt shown moments earlier. The pattern solidified throughout the pre-trial motions. Judge Harrison interrupted Weiss repeatedly, particularly when she attempted to discuss the critical points of Dr. Collins's upcoming testimony. Conversely, he granted the defense team, led by attorney Thomas Bedford, uninterrupted airtime, nodding along with their arguments, as if in preordained agreement. Dr. Bull Collins, a keen observer of human behavior and courtroom dynamics, noted everything, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad, meticulously documenting each interruption, each dismissive gesture directed her way. During a brief recess, Weiss leaned over, her brow furrowed with concern. "I'm sorry about this. Harrison has a reputation for being old school, particularly with—" She trailed off, implying the unspoken gender bias. "I've noticed," Dr. Collins replied calmly, her composure unruffled. "But don't worry, I've dealt with this type of behavior throughout my career." Her words carried a deeper resonance than Weiss could possibly know. What neither the judge nor indeed anyone else in the courtroom realized was that Dr. Collins had cultivated more than just patience during her years of navigating subtle and overt biases. A familiar name, appearing not only on this court docket, but also in her past, was about to connect with Dr. Collins's history in a manner that would irrevocably shatter Judge Harrison's carefully constructed world. The trial commenced with brisk opening statements, setting a tone of controlled urgency. Dr. Collins sat with perfect posture at the witness table, her expression neutral, a serene mask against the palpable tension crackling through the courtroom. When Weiss called her to the stand, Judge Harrison's mouth tightened into a thin line, a visible sign of his displeasure. "Dr. Collins, please state your qualifications for the record," Weiss began. But before Dr. Collins could even utter a syllable, Judge Harrison interjected, his voice sharp with impatience. "We've already established the witness's background during pre-trial. Let's not waste the court's time with repetition." Dr. Collins maintained her composure, her eyes steady as she was sworn in, the weight of the oath feeling heavier than usual under Harrison's cold, scrutinizing stare. Weiss skillfully guided her through her initial testimony, focusing on the patient's critical condition and the hospital's undeniable errors. Dr. Collins spoke with impeccable clarity, her expertise evident in every precisely chosen medical term, every measured explanation. The MRI clearly showed early signs of pressure on the spinal cord that required immediate surgical intervention, she explained, detailing how a critical 12-hour delay had flagrantly violated basic standard of care protocols. Judge Harrison shifted in his seat, his irritation growing. Dr. Collins, please remember this is a courtroom, not a lecture hall. Keep your answers concise. When the defense attorney, Bedford, rose for cross-examination, his approach was immediately, aggressively confrontational. Dr. Collins, isn't it possible that reasonable medical professionals might interpret these MRI results differently? He challenged. No, she responded firmly, her conviction unshakable. The imaging shows unmistakable compression at the C4 to C5 level. Any qualified neurologist would— Objection, Your Honor, Bedford interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. The witness is speculating about other doctors' opinions. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled instantly, without a moment's hesitation. Dr. Collins, stick to what you personally know, not what you believe other doctors might think. When Dr. Collins attempted to explain the universal, peer-established standards for interpreting such critical imaging, Judge Harrison interrupted again, his patience clearly exhausted. The jury doesn't need a medical school lecture, Doctor. Answer the specific questions asked. Dr. Collins, observing his deliberate tactics, adjusted her approach, becoming more concise, yet without sacrificing the critical substance of her expert opinion. When she presented peer-reviewed research supporting her position, Judge Harrison sighed audibly, a theatrical display of his boredom and contempt. Is this academic paper directly relevant to this specific case, Doctor? He asked with thinly veiled scorn, as if questioning the very foundation of scientific inquiry. Yes, Your Honor. This research established the current standard of care that— Move on. He cut her off, his voice clipped and dismissive. The jury needs practical information, not theoretical research. As the questioning continued, Dr. Collins maintained her unwavering professionalism, a beacon of calm amidst the judge's increasing hostility. During a particularly technical explanation, Judge Harrison ostentatiously checked his watch, a deliberate act of public humiliation designed to undermine her credibility. Perhaps we should break for lunch before Dr. Collins continues with her extensive explanations, he suggested, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The courtroom responded with uncomfortable laughter, a collective release of tension tinged with unease. Weiss, the plaintiff's attorney, attempted to object to the judge's openly prejudicial tone, but was swiftly shut down with threats of contempt, a chilling reminder of Harrison's absolute power within his domain. During the recess, Dr. Collins stepped into the courthouse hallway, seeking a momentary respite and a breath of fresh air. From around a corner, she overheard Judge Harrison speaking with Bedford, their voices low but distinct. These academics think they know everything, Harrison sneered, his tone laced with a familiar misogynistic disdain, especially the ones with something to prove. Dr. Collins retreated silently, her expression unreadable, and retrieved her phone from her bag. She slipped into an empty conference room, securing the door behind her, and dialed a number from memory. When the call connected, her voice shifted, shedding the patient expert witness tone for something sharper, more authoritative, a voice accustomed to commanding attention. This is Collins, she stated clearly. I need information on Judge Terran Harrison's judicial record, particularly cases involving female expert witnesses. She listened briefly, her gaze distant, then added, Also, check the ownership records of Bedford Holdings from 2018 to present. I believe our judge has connections he hasn't disclosed. The voice on the other end, accustomed to her precise requests, asked for authorization, and Dr. Collins responded with a code, a signal that set a much larger, unseen machinery in motion, a force far more formidable than any courtroom gavel. The afternoon session intensified, the atmosphere growing heavy like storm clouds gathering before a tempest. Dr. Collins returned to the stand, her demeanor still impeccably professional, a testament to her profound self-control despite the morning's calculated mistreatment. The plaintiff's attorney, now acutely aware of the judge's overt bias, attempted to redirect, guiding Dr. Collins back to the critical findings that unequivocally demonstrated the hospital's negligence. "Dr. Collins," Weiss began, "could you explain how the delay in treatment directly impacted the patient's prognosis?" She nodded, organizing her thoughts with characteristic precision. The 12-hour delay allowed the spinal compression to worsen, resulting in permanent nerve damage that— "Objection," Bedford interrupted, his voice sharp. "Speculative." Judge Harrison didn't hesitate. "Sustained." Weiss frowned, her frustration palpable. "Your Honor, Dr. Collins is establishing causation based on medical evidence." "She's offering conclusions beyond what the evidence supports," Judge Harrison countered, his voice dismissive. "Continue, Counselor, but with more restraint." Dr. Collins attempted to present the established medical timeline, a factual progression of deterioration, but Bedford, emboldened by the judge's consistent favoritism, objected at every critical point. Judge Harrison sustained nearly every objection, effectively gutting Dr. Collins's testimony, rendering it fragmented and impotent. When she tried to reference the patient's deteriorating neurological exams, the judge cut her off mid-sentence, his patience worn thin. "Dr. Collins, are you trying to instruct this court on legal matters now?" "Stick to what you supposedly know." The word supposedly hung in the air like a physical slap, a public impugnment of her extensive credentials and years of dedicated service. Weiss immediately rose to her feet. "Your Honor, that comment impugns the witness's credentials." "Overruled," Harrison snapped, his voice edged with menace. "Counsel, control your witness." "Dr. Hoare." Collins took a slow, deliberate breath, her eyes maintaining a calm intensity. "If I may clarify the medical progression documented in the records—" "The court doesn't need clarification," Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice dismissive. "The jury understands the timeline." When Dr. Collins attempted to cite 3 recent peer-reviewed medical journal publications supporting her position on the egregious standard of care violations, Judge Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "The jury will disregard the doctor's reference to unverified research." Bedford, sensing the shifting currents, seized this golden opportunity, questioning Dr. Collins's publishing record with inappropriate vigor, his tone accusatory. "Isn't it true that your most recent publication was rejected by the Journal of Neurosurgery before being accepted by a less prestigious publication?" "Objection!" Weiss stood, her voice firm. "This line of questioning is irrelevant and designed to harass the witness." "I'll allow it," Judge Harrison said, leaning forward with predatory interest. "The witness's professional standing is relevant to her credibility." For 20 excruciating minutes, Dr. Collins found herself defending her legitimate credentials, her life's work twisted into supposed shortcomings, all while Judge Harrison watched with an almost gleeful satisfaction. The jurors shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact with her out of second-hand embarrassment, others perhaps sensing a deeper unfairness at play. The breaking point, however, came when Dr. Collins, seeking to ground her abstract medical explanations in tangible reality, requested permission to demonstrate a neurological principle using a medical model she had brought. "This visual aid will help illustrate exactly where the compression occurred and why immediate intervention was—" Judge Harrison stood abruptly, his imposing figure looming over her, cutting her off mid-sentence. "This theatrical display is unnecessary and wastes the court's time. Perhaps in your university classroom You can indulge in such performances. But this is a court of law." He signaled to the bailiff, his voice laced with unyielding authority. "Remove that prop from the witness stand." The bailiff approached, his face impassive, and gently, yet with undeniable finality, took the anatomical model from Dr. Collins's hands. The deliberate public humiliation silenced the courtroom, a stark demonstration of unchecked power. Several jurors looked down, deeply uncomfortable with the spectacle. Dr. Collins, however, stood perfectly still, her dignity intact, her composure unmarred, despite the judge's calculated efforts to diminish her. "Your Honor," she said calmly, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the silence. "May I approach the bench?" Judge Harrison hesitated, caught off guard by her audacity, then reluctantly nodded, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. When she reached the bench, she spoke just loud enough for him and the attorneys to hear, her voice a low, measured tone. "Your repeated interruptions and dismissive comments toward me appear to follow a pattern evident in your previous cases with female expert witnesses. This pattern could be interpreted as gender bias." Judge Harrison's face darkened with barely suppressed anger, a storm gathering behind his eyes. "Are you threatening me, doctor? Remember where you are and who you're addressing. I'm simply making an observation based on data, Your Honor," Dr. Collins replied, her gaze unyielding. "That's what scientists do." The judge, reeling from her defiance, dismissed her with a curt wave, then addressed the stunned court. "Due to the late hour and Dr. Collins's clearly limited preparation, we'll adjourn until tomorrow. Perhaps overnight, the doctor can organize her thoughts more coherently." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Dr. Collins's phone vibrated in her pocket. She waited until she was utterly alone, the silence of the empty room a stark contrast to the earlier chaos, to check the message. Financial records located. Judge Harrison and defense attorney Bedford share ownership in 3 investment properties. Call when ready for more. The pieces of a complex, years-in-the-making puzzle began falling perfectly into place, revealing a sinister tapestry woven from bias and corruption. The hotel room door clicked shut behind Dr. Collins. Only now, in the sanctuary of private space, did she allow her professional mask to slip, even slightly. Her shoulders dropped, a subtle release of the immense tension she had carried all day. Her jaw unclenched, the strain of relentless composure momentarily easing. She kicked off her sensible shoes, shedding the day's burden, and stood motionless by the window, watching the impenetrable darkness settle over the city of Baltimore. She granted herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the raw, burning anger, the sting of public humiliation, the injustice that had been heaped upon her. The digital clock on her phone began its silent countdown as she processed the day's relentless events, Harrison's sneering comments, the bailiff's deliberate removal of her cherished teaching model, the jurors' pitying, averted glances. When the timer beeped its final soft note, she straightened her spine, a silent internal transformation from wounded professional to an individual fueled by purpose and unshakable determination. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her focused face, and arranged the case files in precise, strategic order. Then, from a hidden compartment within her sleek briefcase, she retrieved a secure phone and dialed a number not stored in any public contact list. "This is Amara Collins," she stated clearly, her voice once again authoritative, commanding. "Authorization code Sierra Delta 974. The response came immediately, without preamble. "Authentication confirmed. Dr. Collins, we've been expecting your call. What did you find?" Her voice, having shed the patient expert witness tone entirely, was now sharper, more commanding, tinged with a steely resolve. "The financial connections between Harrison and Bedford run deeper than expected," the voice on the other end reported, its tone urgent and precise. "Beyond the 3 properties they co-own, we've identified a shell company that funnels consulting fees from the hospital's parent corporation to Harrison's wife's design firm. The transactions are meticulously structured to avoid detection in standard disclosure reviews." Dr. Collins took notes in a precise shorthand, sketching out a timeline of corruption. "The financial relationship began 8 years ago," the voice continued, "shortly after Harrison was assigned to the medical malpractice division. Since then, Bedford has won 92% of his cases before Harrison, significantly higher than his success rate with other judges. The implications were chillingly clear. A system deliberately gamed." "And the pattern I suspected?" Dr. Collins probed, her voice steady. "Confirmed. We analyzed transcripts from Harrison's last 50 medical malpractice trials. Female expert witnesses receive sustained objections at a rate 78% higher than their male counterparts. Their testimony is interrupted an average of 12 times per hour, versus 3 times for men with identical credentials. His case reversal rate on appeal?" There was a brief pause, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. 7 cases have been overturned in the past decade, citing judicial misconduct with gender-biased undertones. All were quietly reassigned with minimal publicity, effectively swept under the rug. Dr. Collins nodded slowly, unsurprised, yet now armed with irrefutable, concrete data. "Send everything to my secure server and initiate protocol transparency." "Protocol transparency confirmed," the voice responded with new urgency. "The Oversight Committee will be notified. Recording devices are being placed in the courtroom overnight. How would you like to proceed tomorrow?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Dr. Collins's lips, a subtle shift in her formidable composure. "I'll continue as the expert witness they expect for now," she said, her tone calculating, cold. "Let them underestimate me a while longer." After ending the call, Dr. Collins, now fully immersed in her strategic counteroffensive, reorganized her presentation materials for the following day. With meticulous care, she added subtle, almost imperceptible references to case law regarding judicial misconduct, legal precedents that only someone with legal training would recognize. These were breadcrumbs, strategically placed for those who truly paid attention, signals to an unseen audience. She removed her Harvard Medical School pin, a symbol of her medical excellence, and replaced it with a smaller, less noticeable one from the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee, hidden in plain sight, a silent declaration of a different kind of authority. From her suitcase, she retrieved a small, unassuming leather portfolio. Inside lay an ID card for the Federal Judicial Conduct Review Board, a powerful body where she served as a special medical advisor. Next to it rested her official appointment letter to the State Ethics Commission, signed by the governor 3 years prior. Dr. Collins ran her fingers over these credentials, tangible proof of the path she had meticulously built beyond the confines of pure medicine. After enduring subtle and overt bias throughout her early career, she hadn't merely persevered as an exceptional neurologist. She had strategically positioned herself at the critical intersection of medicine and judicial oversight, focusing specifically on systemic bias in medical malpractice cases, understanding that true healing required addressing the broken systems, not just the individual ailments. She closed the portfolio, her mind already reviewing tomorrow's intricate strategy. The judge's egregious behavior had already provided ample evidence, but she needed more, an unimpeachable dossier to ensure a thorough and irrefutable investigation. Tomorrow, she would give him enough rope to professionally hang himself. Her phone chimed softly with a new message as she drifted toward a restless sleep. Additional connection found. Harrison ruled favorably in 3 previous cases involving Bedford's hospital client. All 3 verdicts were later questioned, but never formally investigated. Tomorrow, Judge Harrison wouldn't be evaluating her credibility. She would be evaluating his. The first rays of morning light streamed through the courthouse windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air as Dr. Collins took her seat, a picture of serene resolve. The courtroom buzzed with an almost palpable anticipation. Word of yesterday's tensions, the judge's thinly veiled hostility, and the expert witness's unwavering defiance had spread like wildfire. Sandra Weiss, the plaintiff's attorney, approached, concern etched across her face. "Dr. Collins," she began, her voice low, "after yesterday, I wouldn't blame you for feeling intimidated. Judge Harrison clearly has some issue with you." Dr. Collins, however, arranged her notes with steady, unhurried hands, a testament to her calm resolve. "Trust me, I've handled worse," she replied, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. Weiss blinked, surprised by her unexpected confidence. Before she could respond, the bailiff's booming voice cut through the murmurs, calling the court to order. Judge Harrison entered immediately, his gaze locking onto Dr. Collins with a cold, piercing stare. Today, his hostility radiated without even the slightest pretense of impartiality. "Before we continue," Harrison began, his voice devoid of any warmth once seated, "I want to remind everyone that this court demands respect and professionalism." His gaze, sharp and unwavering, once again locked onto Dr. Collins. Yesterday's proceedings were disappointing in that regard. Dr. Collins noticed something she hadn't seen the day before. A small, almost imperceptible red light blinking on a courtroom camera in the far corner. Protocol transparency was active. Every word spoken, every gesture made was now being recorded, not just for the official record, but for a far more discerning audience, the Oversight Committee. "Dr. Collins," Judge Harrison continued, his voice laced with renewed disdain, "I remind you that you're still under oath. Yesterday's performance was lacking in both substance and respect for this court. I trust today will be different." Weiss rose immediately, her face flushed with indignation. "Objection, Your Honor. That characterization of Dr. Collins's testimony is prejudicial and unfounded." "Overruled," Harrison snapped, his voice sharp and menacing. "One more outburst like that, Counselor, and you'll be held in contempt. Now proceed." The defense attorney, Bedford, resumed his cross-examination with renewed aggression, clearly emboldened by the judge's overt bias. Each question was a calculated attempt to twist Dr. Collins's undeniable expertise into a liability, to undermine her credibility through insinuation. "So, Dr. Collins, you spend most of your time in research rather than direct patient care, correct?" Bedford challenged. "No, that's incorrect. My practice is evenly divided between—" "Objection, Your Honor," Bedford interrupted, cutting her off again. "Non-responsive." "Sustained," Judge Harrison ruled instantly, his bias a thick shroud over the proceedings. "Dr. Collins, answer the specific question asked." Dr. Collins, acutely aware of the recording devices, subtly adjusted her approach. "Approximately 50% of my time involves direct patient care. So only half your time is spent actually treating patients," Bedford emphasized, expertly spinning her accurate answer to imply inadequacy. When Dr. Collins provided a detailed explanation about the glaring standard of care violation, Judge Harrison interrupted yet again. The jury will disregard that entire response. Dr. Collins, you've been warned about offering opinions beyond the scope of the question, Doctor. Collins nodded politely, her composure unshakable, fully aware that every word was being meticulously documented. She then deliberately cited a medical journal which, through her diligent overnight research, she had discovered contained contributions from Judge Harrison's own brother-in-law. The Journal of Neurosurgical Standards, she stated clearly, in which Dr. Lawrence Keller published his definitive work on spinal cord compression, clearly establishes that delays beyond 6 hours constitute negligence. Judge Harrison reacted visibly to the name, a flicker of raw panic crossing his face. That journal is irrelevant to these proceedings, he blustered, his voice rising. Your Honor, she responded with practiced innocence, her tone sweet but with an underlying steel. That journal is considered the definitive source on this specific medical procedure. Is there a reason you find it particularly objectionable? The judge's face reddened with a mixture of anger and dawning fear. Another comment like that, Doctor, and you'll be held in contempt. From the gallery, a man in a quiet grey suit watched intently, taking precise notes on a small pad. He had arrived early that morning, displaying credentials to the bailiff that had granted him immediate, unquestioned access. His badge, temporarily tucked inside his jacket, identified him as a representative from the Judicial Review Board. The trap, meticulously laid by Dr. Collins, was closing a little tighter with each biased ruling Harrison made, each word he uttered. After the morning recess, the defense called their expert witness, Dr. James Phillips, who strode to the stand with practiced confidence. Silver-haired and square-jawed, he embodied the very stereotype of a medical authority that Judge Harrison so clearly respected, perhaps even revered. Dr. Phillips, Harrison said warmly, his voice dripping with deference. Thank you for accommodating the court with your distinguished presence. We understand how valuable your time is. Dr. Collins watched the performance unfold with clinical detachment, a stark contrast to the previous hours. Where her credentials had been aggressively questioned, Phillips's were effusively praised. Where her answers had been interrupted and curtailed, his rambled on, unimpeded. In my 30 years at Metropolitan Hospital, Phillips explained at length, his voice booming with self-importance, I've never seen a case where a 12-hour delay in this specific procedure resulted in the kind of damage claimed here. Judge Harrison nodded appreciatively. Thank you for that clarity, Doctor. Phillips continued to provide long-winded answers, often with minimal scientific backing, frequently resorting to vague phrases like, in my experience, rather than citing established medical literature. When he directly contradicted Dr. Collins's earlier evidence-based testimony about spinal cord compression standards, Judge Harrison allowed it without question, nodding sagely. Excellent explanation, Doctor, Harrison commented after a particularly vague response. Your practical experience truly illuminates this issue. During cross-examination, Weiss, now clearly following Dr. Collins's subtle cues, challenged Phillips's conclusions about the MRI results. Dr. Phillips, she pressed, wouldn't you agree that the imaging shows compression at the C4 to C5 level that meets the criteria for emergency intervention? Objection, Bedford interjected, cutting her off, asked and answered during direct examination. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled instantly, despite Phillips never having addressed that specific, critical question. When Weiss attempted to reference Dr. Collins' earlier testimony about established medical protocols, the judge cut her off immediately. We've already heard Dr. Collins's opinions, such as they were. Move on, Counselor. Dr. Collins made deliberate eye contact with Judge Harrison as she wrote something in her notebook, her pen scratching softly. For a fleeting moment, uncertainty flashed across his face, quickly masked by a renewed surge of hostility. At the plaintiff's table, Dr. Collins passed a folded note to Weiss. The attorney read it, her eyes widening slightly, then quickly composed herself. The note contained specific language from Judicial Conduct Code Section 3.5. A judge shall perform judicial duties without bias or prejudice, along with the critical case citation, Jensen v. State Judicial Commission. The defense proceeded to show a series of medical images, with Phillips offering interpretations that consistently favored the hospital, twisting the facts to fit their narrative. During a tense exchange about subtle features in the MRI, Judge Harrison made his most blatant display of bias yet. The court recognizes Dr. Phillips's superior interpretation of these images, he declared, his voice dripping with condescension, given his extensive clinical experience, compared to academic theorizing. Dr. Collins raised her hand slightly, a gesture of quiet authority. Your Honor, may I clarify something for the record? If you must, Doctor, but briefly. I'd like the record to show that I've personally performed over 500 of these specific procedures, while Dr. Phillips, according to his own CV, has performed 37. I believe accuracy matters in testimony. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Phillips shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence visibly shaken. Judge Harrison, his face contorted in a mask of fury, pounded his gavel. The court doesn't need your commentary on another witness's qualifications. In the gallery, the Judicial Review Board observer made detailed notes, his pen flying across the page. He had been joined by 2 more observers, strategically positioned in different areas of the courtroom, all 3 responding to the escalation alert, triggered by protocol transparency. Their presence remained unnoticed by Harrison, who, blinded by his growing frustration, focused his ire entirely on Dr. Collins. The judge, in his arrogance, didn't realize he was performing for an audience far more important and powerful than the jury before him. The afternoon brought the final decisive phase of testimony. Dr. Collins returned to the stand for redirect examination, her composure unwavering, her purpose crystal clear. The plaintiff's attorney, now expertly following Dr. Collins's subtle cues and understanding the true game afoot, structured her questions to showcase both the doctor's undeniable expertise and the judge's egregious bias. Dr. Collins, can you explain the established medical consensus on spinal compression treatment timelines? Before she could utter a word, Judge Harrison interjected, his voice sharp with impatience. Counsel, we've covered this ground extensively. Your Honor, Weiss responded, her voice firm. The defense expert directly contradicted Dr. Collins's testimony. She deserves the opportunity to address those contradictions. Harrison's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his temple. Proceed, but be concise. Dr. Collins provided a measured, precise response, citing 3 peer-reviewed studies that unequivocally established the 6-hour intervention window as standard practice, each statement a precise dagger aimed at the heart of the defense's argument. With each meticulously presented fact, Harrison's dwindling patience visibly thinned. Dr. Collins, your continued attempts to present yourself as the ultimate authority are trying this court's patience. Your Honor, I'm simply presenting medical facts. Facts according to you, he retorted, his voice dripping with disdain. This court determines what constitutes a fact. This statement, a clear overreach of judicial authority, caused murmurs to ripple through the courtroom, a collective gasp of disbelief. One of the judicial observers typed rapidly on a tablet, flagging the comment for immediate review. Bedford, the defense attorney, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even he recognized the judge's growing recklessness, the dangerous precipice he was approaching. During redirect examination, Bedford, perhaps sensing the peril, moderated his aggressive approach, asking more neutral questions. Harrison noticed this subtle shift and shot Bedford a warning look, a silent, menacing command. The attorney immediately hardened his tone, but the momentary hesitation had already been noted by the observers. "Dr. Collins," Bedford continued, his voice once again sharper, "isn't it possible that reasonable medical professionals might disagree about these imaging results? When the imaging shows clear compression with neurological symptoms, the standard of care is unequivocal," she responded, her voice clear and authoritative. "This is defined in the American Association of Neurological Surgeons Procedural Guidelines, Section 4.3.2, regarding cervical compression with progressive neurological deficit." Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice laced with annoyance. "Dr. Collins, please avoid unnecessarily technical jargon." Dr. Collins tilted her head slightly, her gaze unblinking. "Your Honor, would you prefer I use layman's terms or legally precise medical definitions as required by State Code 47.3 for expert testimony?" The reference to the specific legal code, one that Harrison should have known but clearly didn't, caused him to flush with a deep, furious anger. "Are you questioning my understanding of the law, Doctor?" he thundered, his voice barely controlled. "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm seeking clarification on your preference for my testimony." Harrison stood, looming over her from the bench, his imposing figure radiating raw menace. "What I prefer is a witness who knows her place." The statement hung in the air, damning in its naked bias, a chilling pronouncement of his prejudice. One of the judicial observers quietly exited the courtroom, phone in hand, the wheels of justice now turning against the judge himself. In the gallery, the chief judicial observer made a final, decisive notation and closed his portfolio. The evidence now complete. "Doctor." Collins maintained perfect composure, her gaze steady, unflinching. "And what place would that be, Your Honor?" Bedford, in a desperate attempt to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation, jumped to his feet. "Objection! The witness is being argumentative." "Sustained!" Harrison barked, his face contorted with rage. "Dr. Collins, you are dangerously close to contempt." The plaintiff's attorney intervened, her voice urgent. "Your Honor, may we approach the bench?" "Not necessary," Harrison snapped. "This court will take a 15-minute recess." When he rose to leave, the bailiff approached him, handing him a folded note. Harrison read it, his expression shifting from annoyed rage to dawning, profound concern as the color drained from his face. The metaphorical wheels of justice had begun turning, and they were now set squarely against the judge himself. The courtroom reconvened after 30 minutes, twice the announced recess time, and a tangible tension hung heavy in the air. Whispers circulated among the spectators, a hushed chorus of speculation. Judge Harrison returned, looking visibly shaken, his earlier arrogance replaced by a stiff, almost rigid formality. The plaintiff's attorney leaned toward Dr. Collins, her eyes wide with unasked questions. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Justice," Dr. Collins replied simply, a quiet satisfaction in her voice. Before proceedings could continue, the bailiff again approached Harrison with another note. The judge read it, his complexion paling further, a ghostly pallor spreading across his face. He cleared his throat, a dry, nervous sound. "This court will recess for an additional 30 minutes." As he hurried from the courtroom, almost fleeing, Dr. Collins noticed a new, formidable presence. The district's chief judge had entered silently, taking a seat in the back row, his expression grave, his presence radiating an undeniable authority. Two more individuals in formal attire followed him, carrying official-looking portfolios stamped with the unmistakable state seal. When Judge Harrison finally returned, he no longer walked with his former commanding authority, but moved like a man anticipating an inevitable impact, his every step heavy with foreboding. The chief judge joined him at the bench for a brief, intense, and clearly damning conversation before taking an unprecedented seat in the gallery's front row, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Harrison cleared his throat, his voice lacking its former power, betraying his deep unease. Before we continue, I feel I should clarify some of my earlier statements regarding Dr. Collins's testimony. This court has the utmost respect for all expert witnesses, regardless of their background. The forced retraction, delivered with visible reluctance, came too late. Dr. Collins rose from her seat, a figure of calm, resolute power. "Your Honor, if I may address the court." Harrison hesitated, then nodded, his earlier authority irrevocably shattered, already sensing he had lost complete control of the situation. The chief judge watched intently, his imposing presence an unmistakable sign that normal procedures had been suspended, irrevocably altering the trajectory of the trial. Dr. Collins approached the bench, but instead of stopping there, she turned slowly, deliberately, to face the entire courtroom. From her briefcase, she removed a different set of credentials, not her medical license, but an official ID card bearing the state seal and the federal judiciary emblem. "My name is Dr. Amara Collins," she stated, her voice clear and resonant, filling the hushed room. "While I am indeed a practicing neurologist and expert in medical malpractice cases, I also serve as the appointed special medical advisor to the Federal Judicial Conduct Review Board, focusing specifically on bias in medical testimony evaluation." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, a wave of stunned realization washing over the spectators. Judge Harrison gripped his gavel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his earlier defiance now replaced by a chilling terror. Bedford, the defense attorney, began gathering his papers, his movements frantic, as if preparing to flee a burning building. "For the past 3 years," Dr. Collins continued with calm authority, her voice unwavering, "I've been conducting an authorized review of judicial conduct in medical malpractice cases across this circuit." Judge Harrison's courtroom was scheduled for routine observation. She then turned directly to Harrison, her gaze piercing. "However, upon reviewing your case history before my appearance, I identified concerning patterns that warranted closer investigation. Your treatment of my testimony these past 2 days has, unfortunately, confirmed those patterns." The chief judge stood, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "As of this moment, these proceedings are temporarily suspended. Judge Terran Harrison is recused from this case, pending a full investigation into judicial misconduct." Harrison found his voice, though it lacked its former, thunderous power, now tinged with desperation. "This is outrageous! You deliberately misrepresented yourself." "No, Your Honor," Dr. Collins interrupted calmly, her voice firm. "My credentials as a medical expert are genuine and complete. I was not obligated to disclose my position with the review board during a formal investigation. In fact, doing so would have compromised the integrity of our findings." She addressed the stunned courtroom once more. "When I whispered that authorization code yesterday, Sierra Delta 974, it activated protocol transparency, our highest level of judicial misconduct investigation. The observers, who had been meticulously taking notes throughout the proceedings now, with synchronized movements, revealed their own credentials. Members of the Judicial Review Board, present to document Harrison's conduct firsthand. The defense attorney, Bedford, attempted to slip unnoticed out of the courtroom, but was stopped cold by a federal marshal who had appeared silently at the door. "Mr. Bedford, we'll need to speak with you as well regarding your undisclosed financial relationships with Judge Harrison." The plaintiff, whose years-long struggle had brought them to this unexpected precipice, sat in shocked silence, witnessing justice unfold in a direction no one could have foreseen. Weiss, the plaintiff's attorney, struggled to maintain her professional composure, a triumphant glint in her eyes betraying her obvious satisfaction. Dr. Collins returned to her seat, opening her laptop to reveal a meticulously organized database displaying dozens of similar cases flagged for investigation, many involving the same defense firm and hospital. The screen showed a detailed database tracking patterns of rulings across multiple judges, with Harrison's name highlighted in stark red. Every biased ruling, every dismissive comment, every calculated humiliation had been another nail in Judge Harrison's rapidly closing professional coffin. The news broke like a sudden summer storm, powerful, transformative, and leaving a trail of profound change in its wake. By evening, reporters swarmed the courthouse, their vans forming a chaotic media perimeter as the story of judicial corruption spread like wildfire. "Judge exposed by expert he humiliated," scrolled across the bottom of local news broadcasts. National outlets, sensing the seismic implications, picked up the story by midnight. Inside the chief judge's chambers, Dr. Collins presented her findings to a hastily assembled panel of judicial administrators, their faces grim, their expressions etched with grave concern. The evidence formed a damning constellation, statistical analyses unequivocally revealing Harrison's clear pattern of gender bias, financial records meticulously documenting undisclosed conflicts of interest, and courtroom recordings capturing, in stark reality, his contemptuous treatment of female experts. "We've been tracking Judge Harrison's rulings for 36 months, Dr. Collins explained, navigating through detailed spreadsheets on her laptop with clinical precision. The pattern emerged early, but required substantial documentation to ensure absolute accuracy. She displayed a color-coded chart illustrating the stark ruling disparities. Over the past 3 years, Judge Harrison ruled against female expert testimony at a rate 84% higher than male experts with identical credentials. In medical malpractice cases specifically, when the expert was a woman, he issued favorable rulings to this particular hospital in 92% of cases. A judicial administrator leaned forward, his voice tight with concern. "And you're certain these statistics control for other variables?" "Absolutely," Dr. Collins confirmed, her voice firm. "We matched cases by type, severity, evidence quality, and attorney experience levels. The gender bias remained the only statistically significant factor. The chief judge reviewed the financial documents with growing alarm. These property investments with defense attorney Bedford, completely undisclosed, and these connections to the hospital board through his wife's family business. Yes, Dr. Collins confirmed, a clear violation of judicial ethics requiring recusal. We've identified 27 cases in the past 5 years where these specific conflicts should have been disclosed." In another room down the hall, the hospital's general counsel sat across from the plaintiff's attorney, Sandra Weiss. The atmosphere had transformed dramatically. Where once the hospital had fought the malpractice claim aggressively, they now pushed settlement papers across the table with barely concealed desperation. "Our client deserves fair compensation for their suffering," Weiss stated, sliding the insufficient settlement offer back with a firm shake of her head. This figure doesn't approach adequate, especially in light of recent revelations. The hospital's counsel sighed, a sound of profound defeat. "What number?" he asked, his voice strained, "would resolve this matter quickly and confidentially?" "Confidentiality is no longer an option," Weiss replied, her voice resolute. "Any settlement must include public acknowledgement of the hospital's failures and implementation of new safety protocols." Meanwhile, the Bedford law firm erupted into internal chaos. Thomas Bedford himself faced an emergency meeting of the firm's senior partners, who demanded immediate explanations for the deeply damaging financial entanglements with Judge Harrison. 3 junior partners, seeing the writing on the wall, resigned immediately, emailing their clients about their departure before Bedford could even begin his desperate damage control. "This wasn't just unethical, it was stupid," one departing partner told reporters gathered outside the firm's offices, his voice filled with righteous anger. "He compromised everything we built for a guaranteed advantage in court." Forensic accountants descended on Bedford's financial records, meticulously tracing connections between the law firm, the disgraced judge, and the hospital's leadership. What they uncovered extended far beyond simple property investments, revealing a complex, insidious network of shell companies and clandestine consulting arrangements meticulously designed to hide influence and manipulate judicial outcomes. Dr. Collins met with the original plaintiff, a former construction worker, now partially paralyzed due to the hospital's negligence, his life irrevocably altered. For 3 long years, their case had been delayed, dismissed, and shunted across different courts, their life deteriorating while justice remained cruelly elusive. "Your case became the catalyst," Dr. Collins explained gently, her voice full of empathy. "But you weren't the only one. We've identified 27 similar cases where justice was denied, potentially due to this same pattern of bias and financial conflicts." The plaintiff's eyes, once clouded with despair, filled with tears. "I just wanted them to admit they made a mistake," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I never thought it would uncover all this." A class action lawsuit quickly began forming as other patients with similar experiences, their voices long silenced, now came forward. Their stories followed an alarming, consistent pattern. Cases brought before Judge Harrison, involving female expert witnesses whose testimony was systematically dismissed, and favorable rulings for the hospital despite compelling evidence of negligence. The hospital's stock price plummeted 15% in a single trading day as investors reacted swiftly to the potential massive liability. Their board called an emergency session, voting unanimously to replace their general counsel and initiate a thorough internal investigation into their relationship with Bedford law firm and the now disgraced Judge Harrison. Within the judicial system itself, a comprehensive review immediately launched. Other judges with known connections to Harrison found their past rulings rigorously scrutinized. 2 proactively recused themselves from current medical malpractice cases, sensing the changing tide and hoping to avoid deeper, more damaging investigations into their own conduct. Bedford law firm, in a desperate attempt to salvage its reputation, issued a carefully worded press release. "We are shocked by these allegations and have placed Mr. Bedford on indefinite leave pending investigation. Our firm remains committed to the highest ethical standards." Behind closed doors, however, the remaining partners scrambled frantically to distance themselves from Bedford's toxic actions, fearing the firm's complete dissolution. An anonymous source within the firm, unable to stomach the deceit any longer, revealed to reporters that Bedford had routinely boasted about his special relationship with Judge Harrison, even coaching expert witnesses on how to manipulate Harrison's known preferences and prejudices. The Judicial Ethics Committee, recognizing the widespread implications, expanded their investigation beyond Harrison to encompass the entire medical malpractice division of the Circuit Court. They discovered a troubling systemic pattern of biased rulings favoring certain powerful hospitals and insurance companies across multiple judges, strongly suggesting a systemic problem rather than an isolated case of individual corruption. Medical associations across the state issued strong statements supporting Dr. Collins and urgently calling for comprehensive reforms in how expert testimony was evaluated in critical malpractice cases. Several prominent physicians came forward with their own searing stories of judicial bias, creating a watershed moment for profound, systemic reform. As investigators dug deeper into Harrison's meticulously kept case files, they uncovered evidence even more damning than initially suspected. Encrypted emails between the judge and a hospital board member explicitly discussed how to handle upcoming malpractice cases, with specific mention of ensuring the right experts are heard and the wrong ones discredited. This chilling discovery elevated the misconduct from mere ethical violations to potential criminal conspiracy, shaking the foundations of public trust. The State Attorney General, in a solemn press conference, announced a formal criminal investigation into possible judicial corruption, with federal authorities closely monitoring the escalating situation. Dr. Collins continued her vital dual roles throughout the unfolding drama, testifying with renewed purpose in the resumed malpractice trial before a new, impartial judge, while simultaneously consulting with the Judicial Review Board on the rapidly expanding investigation. Her calm expertise in both medicine and legal ethics made her the perfect, indispensable bridge between these two complex, often conflicting worlds. When asked by a reporter why she pursued this path beyond her demanding medical career, she responded simply, yet profoundly, "Justice and health are inseparable. What good is medical knowledge if the system prevents its fair application? Some infections require systemic treatment, not just local intervention." In a chilling discovery that underscored the depth of his prejudice, investigators found Harrison's handwritten notes about Dr. Collins from before the trial. Another woman who needs to be put in her place. 6 weeks later, Judge Terran Harrison sat on the other side of the bench, a humbling, almost surreal reversal of fortune. He faced the Judicial Conduct Committee in a sterile, unforgiving government hearing room, stripped of all pomp and circumstance. His expensive suit, once a symbol of his power, now hung slightly loose on his frame. The relentless stress of exposure had taken its visible physical toll. His once commanding presence had diminished, his shoulders slumped, his voice lacking its former booming authority, now thin and reedy. Beside him sat his attorney, Jacob Stern, a former judicial colleague now tasked with the unenviable, impossible burden of defending the indefensible. The committee members, 3 judges, 2 attorneys, and a public representative, reviewed documents with solemn, unyielding expressions. The room slowly filled with spectators, including several former litigants from Harrison's courtroom who had come to witness his judgment day, a quiet, somber testament to the justice they had been denied. Dr. Collins took the witness stand, her presence commanding, yet not fueled by anger or a desire for revenge. Her clinical precision, her detached presentation of irrefutable facts, made the evidence all the more damning. The statistical deviation in Judge Harrison's rulings cannot be attributed to chance or coincidence, she explained, displaying meticulously crafted charts that tracked his decision patterns over 15 years, a lifetime of prejudice laid bare. When controlling for all other variables, case type, evidence quality, attorney experience, gender bias emerges as the only statistically significant factor in these disparities. She presented a color-coded timeline, a stark visual representation showing the chilling progression of Harrison's biased rulings. The pattern intensified approximately 8 years ago, she stated, coinciding with the beginning of his financial relationship with the Bedford firm. Harrison shifted uncomfortably, his once imperious gaze now furtive, as his own rulings appeared on the projection screen, categorized by the gender of expert witnesses and the ultimate outcome, a visual indictment. The evidence was overwhelming, unassailable. Stern, Harrison's attorney, made a desperate attempt to undermine her methodology. "Dr. Collins, isn't it possible your statistical approach contains inherent bias? After all, you came looking for a pattern." "That's why we employed double-blind analysis," she responded calmly, her voice even. 3 independent statisticians reviewed anonymized data without knowing what factors we were investigating. All 3 identified the same pattern. When Stern, in a final, futile effort, questioned her qualifications to make such precise assessments, the committee chair intervened, his voice firm and unequivocal. "Dr. Collins holds degrees in both medicine and statistical analysis, and has published peer-reviewed research on decision-making bias in healthcare and legal settings. Her qualifications are not in question here." The financial evidence proved even more devastating. Bank records displayed undeniable transfers between Harrison's family trust and Bedford's offshore account, following key favorable verdicts. Property records revealed a complex pattern of asset transfers, deliberately structured to avoid mandatory disclosure requirements. Judge Harrison accepted approximately $347,000 in indirect payments over 8 years, the forensic accountant testified, his voice devoid of emotion. The transactions were designed specifically to evade standard ethics disclosures. When Harrison finally spoke in his own defense, his narrative crumbled under rigorous questioning. He claimed ignorance of financial disclosure requirements, a ludicrous assertion given he had himself instructed other judges on those very rules at judicial conferences. He vehemently denied any bias, yet was utterly unable to explain the overwhelming statistical anomalies in his rulings. "These academic analyses don't capture the nuances of courtroom dynamics," he insisted, inadvertently echoing the very dismissive language he had used against Dr. Collins. "Each case is unique. Statistical patterns can be misleading." "Yet," noted a committee member, his voice cold and incisive, "the pattern becomes remarkably consistent when the expert witness is female. How do you explain that specific correlation?" Harrison had no answer. The committee's deliberation was brief, swift, and decisive. Their recommendation came without hesitation: immediate removal from the bench, referral to the State Bar Association for disbarment proceedings, and a full criminal investigation for judicial corruption. The evidence demonstrates a persistent pattern of gender-based bias and serious financial impropriety that utterly undermines public confidence in the judiciary, the chair announced, his voice ringing with grave authority. "This committee finds that Judge Harrison has violated Canons 1, 2, and 3 of the Code of Judicial Conduct and is unfit to continue serving." As Harrison left the hearing room, reporters swarmed him with a barrage of questions, their flashes momentarily blinding him. The man who had once commanded a courtroom with unquestioned impunity now hurried to his car, covering his head with his coat, refusing to comment, his reign of power irrevocably ended. His attorney offered only a terse statement about appealing the decision, a futile gesture against the weight of the evidence. That evening, news programs ran side-by-side images. Judge Harrison towering over Dr. Collins in court weeks earlier, a picture of absolute power, contrasted with today's footage of him shrinking from public view, a broken man. Legal commentators discussed the broader, profound implications for judicial accountability. This case reveals how power can corrupt the very system designed to ensure justice, one analyst explained, his voice somber. The question now is how many other judges might be operating with similar bias, hidden beneath the veneer of impartiality. At home, Harrison watched his once impeccable reputation disintegrate in real time. Former colleagues issued swift, damning statements, distancing themselves from him. The governor announced the formation of a task force to review all his past decisions, unraveling his entire career. Social media platforms overflowed with stories from women who had faced his courtroom bias over the years, their voices finally heard. His phone rang constantly. Reporters, former friends, his increasingly concerned attorney as the criminal investigation intensified. When he finally answered, it was his attorney with more devastating news. "Terry, federal agents just executed search warrants at Bedford's offices and the hospital. They're seizing computers and files related to what they're calling a years-long conspiracy to manipulate judicial outcomes. This is moving beyond ethics violations into criminal territory." Harrison stared at the judicial ethics code framed on his wall, a bitter irony. The same rules he had spent a career manipulating and violating now stood as an unyielding testament to his downfall. 3 months after Judge Terran Harrison's ignominious removal, the ripple effects continued to transform the judicial landscape, a testament to Dr. Collins's unwavering commitment to systemic change. Dr. Collins stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the State Judicial Conference Center, addressing hundreds of judges who sat in attentive, respectful silence. The very people who might have dismissed her expertise or intellect months ago leaned forward, captivated by her presentation, their expressions a mix of awe and introspection. The Harrison case wasn't about one judge's misconduct, she explained, her voice carrying through the hushed room, resonating with conviction. It revealed systemic vulnerabilities that allowed bias to flourish unchecked for years. Behind her, slides displayed the comprehensive reforms already implemented across the state court system, a direct consequence of her actions. The conference had devoted its entire agenda to examining bias in expert witness evaluation and implementing new, robust safeguards against judicial misconduct. A technology team demonstrated new monitoring software, a direct result of Dr. Collins's methodology, designed to track judicial rulings for statistical anomalies that might indicate unconscious bias. The system flags patterns of decisions that correlate with gender, race, or other protected characteristics of expert witnesses, she clarified. This isn't about policing thought. It's about creating awareness of potential blind spots we all carry. The data serves as a mirror, not a judgment. Across the state, courts implemented mandatory bias training with particular focus on gender disparities in expert witness credibility assessment. Judicial performance reviews now included crucial bias metrics, with regular external audits conducted by qualified statisticians who meticulously looked for patterns similar to those found in Harrison's courtroom. The Chief Justice rose to announce additional sweeping reforms. Starting next month, all financial disclosure requirements will be significantly expanded. Judges must now report not just direct investments, but also family connections to industries frequently appearing before their courts. The State Bar Association simultaneously implemented stricter disclosure requirements for attorneys, with severe penalties for concealing financial relationships. Several judges, reading the changing tides, voluntarily recused themselves from cases where even the appearance of conflict existed. A profound cultural shift in judicial ethics prompted by Harrison's public downfall. At Metropolitan Hospital, the very institution whose negligence had sparked the entire saga, the board of directors had been entirely restructured, with patient advocates now holding key, influential positions. Their first action was establishing a transparent medical review process for alleged malpractice, often resolving valid claims before they ever reached the costly, adversarial stage of litigation. We're focusing on healing relationships with patients, not just defending against lawsuits, the new board chair explained at a press conference. When we make mistakes, we acknowledge them and make proper restitution. Bedford law firm, once a bastion of power, had dissolved entirely, its remaining partners scrambling to dissociate themselves from the widespread scandal. 3 former clients filed devastating malpractice suits against the firm, claiming they were never informed of the conflicts of interest that may have prejudiced their cases. The most significant change came from the state Supreme Court, which issued new rules allowing for greater scrutiny of judicial conduct during trials. Attorneys could now request independent review of patterns of rulings without facing contempt charges, a direct response to how Harrison had silenced any challenges to his bias. We cannot have a justice system where questioning a judge's impartiality becomes punishable, the Chief Justice explained, his voice firm. Proper respect for the bench doesn't require blind deference to potential misconduct, Dr. Collins now worked with a dedicated team of data scientists to refine the intricate algorithms that had first identified Harrison's pattern of misconduct. The project, now generously funded by a judicial integrity grant, aimed to create an early warning system for courts across the country. 3 neighboring states had already requested access to the groundbreaking technology. As she concluded her presentation, Dr. Collins displayed a simple yet profoundly impactful slide showing improved outcomes in medical malpractice cases, not measured by who wins or loses, but by the consistency of evidentiary standards, regardless of expert gender. "This is what progress looks like," she told the assembled judges, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "Not perfect, but measurably better." As the reforms took tangible shape across the judicial system, a package arrived at Dr. Collins's office. Inside was a judicial complaints report from a neighboring state, accompanied by a handwritten note. "We've identified a similar pattern here. Can you help?" The battle against systemic bias had only just begun, with Dr. Collins now recognized as its most formidable warrior. 1 year later, Dr. Collins stood at a podium, accepting the American Bar Association's special citation for her extraordinary contributions to judicial integrity. The audience, a diverse mix of legal professionals, medical experts, and judicial reform advocates, rose to give her a thunderous standing ovation that continued until she gently raised her hands, signaling for silence. What happened in Judge Harrison's courtroom wasn't just about gender bias or financial corruption, she began, her voice resonating with conviction. It was about the fragility of justice when power goes unchecked, and the profound capacity for systems to heal when confronted with truth. Warm lighting illuminated the diverse faces in the crowd. The camera panned across several familiar figures from the original courthouse drama. The plaintiff, who finally received proper compensation after a new trial, the chief judge, who had supported the investigation when presented with irrefutable evidence, even one of the junior partners from Bedford's firm, who had become a whistleblower after the initial revelations, choosing integrity over complicity. "Systems depend on people willing to hold them accountable," Dr. Collins continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "A year ago, I stood in a courtroom being deliberately humiliated because I represented a threat to a corrupt status quo. Today, I stand before you because that same system has the capacity to heal itself when enough people demand better." Dr. Collins continued her vital work as both a neurologist and a judicial system advisor. But now she did so openly, her dual expertise having made her a highly sought-after speaker at legal and medical conferences, where she shared her groundbreaking methodology for identifying patterns of bias. 3 universities had created prestigious fellowship programs based on her interdisciplinary approach, cultivating a new generation of legal and medical scholars committed to justice. Former Judge Harrison's legacy now served as a cautionary tale in ethics classes at law schools nationwide. His case study appeared in judicial training materials, stripped of any remaining prestige, a stark warning against the abuse of power. After pleading guilty to reduced charges of corruption, he served community service at the very hospital he had once protected, assisting patients who struggled with the complex medical system, a subtle but profound form of poetic justice. "Accountability doesn't always mean punishment," Dr. Collins explained when asked about Harrison's unique sentence. "Sometimes it means redirecting someone's energy toward healing the very systems they damaged." The original plaintiff from the malpractice case had used part of their settlement to establish a patient advocacy foundation, with Dr. Collins serving on its advisory board. Together, they helped vulnerable patients navigate complex medical and legal systems, ensuring their voices were heard, their rights protected. The greatest injustice was that it took 3 years for this patient to receive proper compensation, Dr. Collins noted during a foundation meeting. "Our goal is to make sure no one else waits that long for justice." The courtroom where it all began had been reformed as well. The new judge appointed to replace Harrison, a woman with both legal and medical credentials, had quickly established a reputation for fair treatment of all expert witnesses, evaluating testimony on its merit rather than gender or status. Dr. Collins occasionally returned to that courtroom as an expert witness, always with a moment of quiet reflection as she took the stand. The experience had neither hardened nor embittered her. Instead, it had reinforced her profound belief in systems of accountability and the unshakable power of speaking truth, even when your voice trembles. Her office at the University Medical Center had expanded to include a small, dedicated team focused on monitoring judicial bias in medical cases nationwide. On her desk sat a small, unassuming plaque with words that had become her personal motto and the poignant title of her upcoming book on judicial reform, "Justice Sees Through Bias." The case that began with a moment of raw humiliation had transformed into a powerful, enduring movement for accountability that continued to spread across the legal and medical professions, a testament to one woman's courage and strategic brilliance. Dr. Collins didn't consider herself an activist, just a professional, utterly unwilling to accept that some voices deserved less respect than others. "In medicine, we are taught to treat the underlying condition, not just the symptoms," she explained to a curious student who asked about her approach. "Bias isn't just a personal failing. It's a systemic disease that requires systemic treatment."